is on that sharing board. So let me just open that. Can everyone see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
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 Yep.
So thank you so much to the Texas group of IoT, North Texas group, to be the host of this event. I have the honor to run a panel here with distinguished guests from the IoT, automation, venture capital, and also academic world. The topic for today is the critical success factors when implementing industrial IoT projects. And today the focus will be very strong on the manufacturing aspect, but the industrial IoT encloses many aspects like predictive maintenance, smart energy, smart cities, connected logistics, and smart digital supply chain. In the discussion today, we will also talk about logistics and digital supply chain because they are very strongly interrelated with the smart manufacturing space, of course. You can't do one with the other without the other. And so I'm going to have a short introduction here, and then I will introduce the panel with pictures. And so we have distinguished guests from large companies, but also very exquisite consulting companies. And I want to also introduce my co-host, Gary Ramsey, VP of Innovation of Terralogic, and Chris Siemens, the co-moderator, CTO of Orcatect. So what's the problem? I just frame it in very simplistic terms now. We have numerous IoT industrial projects going on at the moment. And the implementation and sale of those is always a challenge in industrial settings. It's very different from consumer Internet of Things that can be scaled very easily. And then, of course, the problem needs to be solved because every ROI of a project has to be justified. From the seller perspective and from obviously inside the company. And once we have solved this, we can make sure that IoT project can be scaled across organization. This is just framing it in a very simple terms from the beginning, but this is what we look at these. So what will be further the framework? We're looking at success stories and good examples. What are the technology advancements? What are the economic consideration when selling, proposing IoT projects? The technology consideration, what's the value add? And also we look at it from an investment perspective. What's the landscape in IoT right now? And for that, I introduce, and I'm honored to introduce the panelists, Dr. Juri Behler, who wrote a PhD thesis about the subject, and is a distinguished manager at Siemens in Germany. Then we have Mark Beckmann, who is a Director Manufacturing Industry Solutions 4.0 at Microsoft Corporation. And David Stephen Jacoby, the Managing Director of Boston Strategies, that provide digital solution and outsourcing services. But not only that, he's also very much engaged in sustainable supply chains where IoT, of course, becomes more and more important. And then we have Jim Owens, the Senior Vice President of Business Development of SDI, also focused very strong on supply chain solutions in the industrial manufacturing space. Then Dr. Prakash Shrivastava, who's a distinguished professor at the University of Texas in Dallas. And he is not only that, but he's also was a decades manager at General Motors and many other worldwide industrial companies. And then we have Vishal Shah, is the Vice President of Sales of Tech Mahindra, which is an integrator in the technology world. Specifically here, he is responsible for the IoT deployment and sales in the United States. And last but not least, Aaron Wagner, the co-founder and managing partner of i3 Equity Partners, a Israeli venture capital firm that is focused also on IoT projects, which will give us a very good overview of the investment status in this particular space. And then just me, I was already introduced, and Chrissa introduced, and Gary, who is a VP of Innovation of Terralogic Solutions, that is also an integrator. And in that regard, I want to just jump into the discussion. Thank you, all your panelists. And I want to start with Dr. Behler from Siemens, who kind of inspired me to the subject when I read his PhD thesis, the subject of the thesis. And I think there's not a lot of research going on in this field. And so I'm very extremely thankful to hear from Juri a little bit. And Juri, so tell me, how do you sell the value of your IoT solutions at Siemens? And in what way you make sure there's long-term satisfaction at the customer in context of your IoT deployments?
Hello, Volkmar. Hello, panel. Yeah, first of all, thank you for introduction. And yeah, it's quite a difficult topic, because I'm talking about context of IoT in context of services. And to sell this kind of services, you need, first of all, a good argument of this. I mean, you need a value of the service, first of all, and you need to bring this value to the customer. So you need also well-trained sales personnel, which basically is combination of consultants and I would say translators of customer pain points into technology stock. So this personnel is quite difficult to find, but it's a crucial factor in this context. So they need to show the customer very tangible and in argumentative manner the benefits of services which we developed. And of course, you also need some kind of advertisement of this. So it's like a door opener in this context. And yeah, there's also some other factors, but I will jump to your second question. satisfaction. So I mean, even after you reach acceptance of your customers, you also need to ensure the loyalty of your customer, the satisfaction of them. So basically, there are two main factors of this. So first of all, it's data availability and system availability of your solution. So because we are talking about service, and if it doesn't work, or it works with interruption and so on, the customer will be unsatisfied. So it's pretty understandable, but it needs management attention on it. And second one factor is constant adjustment to, I would say, to customer context. What I mean by this, so the algorithm of AI are getting older with the time. The also the processes of customers, they are changing every time, and also on the connectivity level and pre-processing level, you need to change always something. So you need to adapt your solution to this customer context, and also leave this versioning, this release culture. So I think it's enough from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this short introduction. And you brought the keyword AI, and I was thinking, I mean, Siemens is obviously a big infrastructure player, but you also have your software. That brings me maybe to Microsoft, and ask Mark Beckmann what his perspective is on this topic of value creation and IoT, and what his experiences is particular with manufacturing organizations, and maybe if there were some project with Siemens or not, and AI, what Microsoft's value add in that field is.
Yeah, Volkmar, thanks. And thanks for everybody for inviting us actually to share some thoughts here. You know, we're a technology platform provider. All right, so I can tell you kind of the bits to do IoT are there. And the fact of the matter is, as we discussed, value is really the important part of the conversation. Sometimes that's a little challenging for companies, and it really depends on the type of IoT type of project we're talking about. I mean, we can think about a connected thermostat or connected car if we want to go there. In the manufacturing sector, it becomes kind of challenging from a value perspective, because manufacturers are used to investing capital and getting, you know, 20% more production out of it. And that thinking isn't as conducive to valuing an IoT type project. So one of the things that we've learned, quite frankly, is that the people, the culture, the management structure really needs to be intertwined, integral into understanding the strategy, but then figuring out the project that we want to tackle. There's a lot of things we can unwrap and unpack on those type of topics. But you asked me about some success factors, and certainly Siemens and all of the other controller vendors have, you know, a manufacturer's going to have a little bit of everything, quite frankly, and that brownfield tends to be quite challenging for organizations. Again, a platform type of technology strategy is apropos for this. But from an artificial intelligence perspective, I mean, when Industry 4.0 kind of emanated from Germany, some of the German companies, ThyssenKrupp, for example, focused on the elevators. And you know, instrumenting sensors in the elevators and building a service around that. Not so much to do IoT type of things, but IoT enabled them to really optimize the field service technicians' jobs. All right, and it's simply, how can I, you know, get them to the right place at the right time versus doing the routes? How can I take that information then and be predictive on things that are happening with the elevators? Plenty of other examples and case studies to share along those lines. And I'll leave it at that and let some of the other folks chime in and chat about that as well.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Very appreciated. Prakash, I want to hear your perspective. When we were talking before in preparation of the the webinar, you were kind of pointing out from a also scientific perspective, but I know you have the industrial, about the scientifically the KPIs that might be needed to make informed decision making, or better say, what KPIs does a customer want to achieve, or what is the measurements of KPIs in respect and in the of the IoT framework of Industry 4.0?
Thanks, Volkmar. Let's consider it from two perspectives. When we talk about business outcomes, one way to think about is new revenue streams or higher revenue. And then other could be cost savings, so the top line and the bottom line. So if we consider the KPIs, the metrics associated with it, let's say from a cost savings perspective, we should be looking at operations excellence. Okay, how do we automate our production? How do we manage our assets? How do we reduce downtime, etc.? And on the other side, risk avoidance. Okay, how do we minimize risks in decision making, and how do we make sure that we are compliant so we don't have to pay fines, etc.? When you talk about the revenue streams, then you are trying to talk about in-process monitoring or quality control kind of a thing, so that the products are sold, you don't never get stocked out or things like that. And then customers are happy with your products and services that you are providing. So those are some of the top metrics that come about. We can talk about, like say, cost savings. In this case, we can talk about supply chain efficiency, like decreasing supply cycle time or inventory cost reduction. Or when we talk about customer intimacy or engagement, then we are talking about customized products and services like customer retention and rates increases and all of that. So in this modern world, what is happening is this new KPIs are coming about and everybody's trying to digitalize. So one of the questions you have to ask is, how digital are we? What benefits do we get from this digitalization? Because it's not going to be cheap. So you have to think about some digital business KPIs. This says, for example, in customer experience, you can say, what are the percentage of interactions that are digital today? And how many customer interactions would be better in 2 years? Or when you are talking about operations, like digitalizing your operations and all that, you can say, what percentage of our operational assets are connected? Is it 5%, 7%? What does it ought to be? 20%, 25%, and by when? And what will be the payback associated with it? In the logistics you mentioned, you're trying to digitalize supply chain as an example. What percentage of fleet is tracked in real time? How are you monitoring its performance? What is it today? What will be in 3 years from now? And that will provide you the paybacks and things that are required. So those are some of my thoughts, and I am open to discussions further on this topic.
Yeah, so one of the keywords that came out was right now the fleet management and optimization. And I'm gonna ask David, because his company, Boston Strategies International, does a lot of consulting projects in the logistics and fleet management. What he thinks particularly about the subject of IoT, logistics, and supply chain.
Great. Well, thank you, Volkmar, and thank you to the previous experts who have really made some beautiful and accurate contributions so far. There are, fundamentally, your opening question had to do with value, which I think is a great place to start. And value is typically, in my book, literally in my book, Guide to Supply Chain Management, is typically measured on 4 dimensions. One is net operating profit, for the bottom line, and the next one might be asset efficiency, and the third one might be the gross margin, and the fourth one might be total revenue potential. And those 4 aspects of supply chain tend to drive the value that can be created through excellent supply chain management. Now, in the logistics world, to get to your question, you were talking about fleet tracking and asset management. So this particularly ties to the second one, which is about asset reduction. So how to get the same or more output, throughput, deliveries, et cetera, with fewer assets. And, just take, for example, pooling, asset pooling. So equipment pooling has been around for decades. It's been made into a business model by companies sort of that subordinate to companies like FedEx and UPS, who actually run concentrated either container deconsolidation facilities or pooled centers where equipment, it comes and goes in a sort of a cross-dock way. And the ability now with information, actually nest information at the individual item level and at the carton level and at the box level, at equipment level is really increasing, especially now that some new technologies are enabling the tracking of individual materials, not just units, but at the SKU level, but actual raw materials. There can be tracking technology embedded in there. So that all allows extremely good leverage for cost takeout and equipment takeout, which results in asset efficiency, increased asset efficiency. Another point that was brought up along those lines is how you measure that and what new KPIs are coming on board. And I think Prakash brought up some good points there with we're now measuring, in addition to some of those things, we're seeing more emphasis on sales throughput and I'd say because IoT solutions have the ability to just de-bottleneck. And when you de-bottleneck, you can deliver more. Amazon can deliver more with drones. You can deliver more with LTL and last mile delivery than you ever could before if you do your data measurement, your IoT sensors and telemetries right and everything. And that ends up being of more value strategically to the companies like Amazon, for example, than cost takeout. So that one is really important. And the other thing I wanted to mention, just in terms of KPIs, while we're on the subject, is in a manufacturing environment, it has traditionally been a very big debate whether or not to account cost avoidance as a savings. And this is just the thread that goes through consulting history, since time immemorial. But now we're seeing more and more and more opportunities for cost avoidance, both in logistics and in manufacturing. Cost avoidance, take the Uber example and Uber Freight, which that one isn't around, but there are plenty of other mimicking companies around trying to operate on the same model. The ability to avoid cost and to avoid investment is driving entire industries and business models and investments. And so I think the pendulum has swung on that one, whereas say 10 or 20 years ago, it was a little bit of a heresy to count cost avoidance as a savings. But now I think it's generally accepted.
Thank you so much for this. And now I'm asking Jim, who's also very engaged in the implementation of those supply chain programs as a Senior Vice President of Business Development. How do you sell those values that David just pointed out to your customers, and what are the challenges in the implementation eventually?
Sure. Thanks, Volkmar, and appreciate the invite to participate. And it's been great so far. To your question, so we're a little bit different. We approach it more like what Mark from Microsoft said when he referenced ThyssenKrupp. And so we are a supply chain services company. We happen to specialize in spare parts management, primarily for manufacturers. And so we use IoT more or traditionally for supply chain efficiency and driving more efficiency on the supply side. And then as going forward, where we're really looking at it is for predictability of demand, being able to marry those two things and have us sit right in the center so we can optimize the supply chain while also making sure that our customers have great reliability and asset uptime. The thing that we do that may be a little bit different than than most, and it touches on something David said, is we focus more heavily on the problem. And we try to understand discrete problems within manufacturing and understand them even better than the customer. And we try to find problems that are scalable across not only one vertical in many companies, but multiple verticals. And then we solve that problem better than anyone else through people, process, and technology. And then we sell that problem through commercial insight selling. You know, teaching the customer something about their business that they didn't know, but they should, and being able to back it up with data and quantify the size of the problem or the opportunity. It could be an opportunity as well, and being able to share that with them. And then, you know, the solution itself becomes a little bit easier for the customer to digest and accept, because they've been educated, so to speak, as to, you know, what the opportunity looks like or what the risk is, and the ROI at that point is extremely high. I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Jim. And yeah, so obviously logistics, supply chain needs hardware, software. It needs a framework, a technical framework, and I think Vishal could, with his background also with Qualcomm, now he's the VP at Tech Mahindra, could elaborate on the critical success factor of software, hardware infrastructure, and sensoric to enable those solutions that David and Jim alluded to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Volkmar. Thank you for the opportunity. So Tech Mahindra happens to be, we have a pretty good vantage point where we happen to be one of the largest global system integrators, bringing in various 5G technologies, telecom technologies, as well as more recently, IoT implementations across multiple verticals, whether it is heavy industry, life sciences, the automotive industries, etc. So we have this great vantage point where, as both Jim and Mark mentioned, we try to take a platform approach and bring in the key portions, whether it's devices from Schneider Electric, whether it's an end-to-end IoT system and cloud system from Azure, and then an ability to bring it all together and help with the data and analytics and monitoring as well. So one of the biggest challenges we see is that with IoT, when there are so many good components out there in the ecosystem, it's a lot like buying furniture from IKEA. It looks great when you're at the store and you think you're going to put it together in 30 minutes when you go back home. But if you're anyone like me, I still have my desk sitting from the pandemic time, waiting on some parts, and just have not been able to put it together, right? So that's where like system integrators and having a partner, a GSI who can help, who has the view of bringing things together, comes in very handy. Because in IoT, I believe people are over the use cases and the ROI. Everybody agrees that there is phenomenal ROI when you implement IoT solutions, whether it's on the cost side or the profit side. So that's, kind of a done deal. The bigger challenge in terms of the resistance seems to be on the implementation side, both from an IT perspective and an operations OT perspective. How do you work when you're working with a heavy manufacturing company? How do you make sure that your private network that you're installing is going to be secure, right? So that no one's going to hack into it. Because with 5G and with some of these private networks, even though you have some amazing data rates, these same data rates can be used by hackers to get into each and every sensor and each and every IoT device that you have, right? So that's the whole, the IoT, the IT security element, and then the operations technology. You're working with some really legacy factories, you're working with some legacy fleets. How do you have a more modular approach? How can you install an easy module that connects to some of these the fleet management systems to accelerate the whole IoT adoption process? So I think that's to me, like thinking that term is quite key. The other aspect I thought, just to build on what Mark said about the overall platform, I think what's really interesting and what companies like Microsoft Azure and all are doing is really enabling edge computing. These IoT devices are not just dumb devices that are like sending back data to the server. A lot of intelligence is now being built into the edge device itself. So for example, we're working with a potato chip company to do quality control. And we have a camera that's sitting on the assembly line when the final products come out. And with that camera, we have on the edge itself ability to do quality control on the size and the portion of like a Pringles like chip that'll fit perfectly. So it's that kind of computing that you can now do at the edge, thanks to silicon, thanks to better better software that is there. So a lot of on-time computing can be done there. And then if you want to do a lot of the AI, heavy AI that needs to be more data centric, that can be sent to your cloud when needed at the right time.
Thank you so much, Vishal. Since we have discussed all these challenges, specifically in the implementation of things, I would like to ask Aaron, please, to allude to enlighten us a little bit about how upcoming startups in the IoT space can kind of bridge and or can enable the big players to do their job more sufficiently, and where do you see the gaps in the technology world right now that are open? Aaron, are you here?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Forgot to unmute, but now it's
thanks.
Now it's better. I think enlighten is a slightly strong word in this context, but I will try to add my 2 cents from a startup perspective. When companies come to get funded with new ideas that incorporate IoT technologies, it does help, or it's helped in the last few years to answer the question, why now? Why now? Because you can connect things to the network. Why now? Because you can use data that you collect in a smart way and leverage new AI technologies. But it's, as was mentioned earlier, it's just the why now. It doesn't answer the why at all. And the comments that were made earlier about business value, top line, bottom line, other types of value are critical and important for us to analyze when we think about new startup ideas, and especially when it comes to deciding whether the technology can replace existing processes and machines, or it comes to leverage existing infrastructure and simply make it better. Manufacturers and other industrial complex entities have many factors when they come to analyze the time to return on investment of any kind of new project that may have risks involved, especially when it comes to new startups. And then the most important factor that we focus on is the fast time to value. Even if you don't bring the entire value, big companies can create agreements between them and trust each other to deliver because they have a lot of trust between them. But little startups have very little of that, and they need to show value very quickly and then be able to scale when the right time comes. And IoT is very helpful in that sense, that you can enable new business models where you focus on what we call sometimes the outcome economy, meaning that you don't have to pay for value that you're not getting, and switch from product sales based on capital expenditure to services that are based on the operational expenditure budgets, and are typically very small and can be halted at any time. When we come to analyze all of these factors, we try to see how we can impact the operational, the financial, the strategic outcome for big customers. And if we take all these factors into account, when we are successful, it's only due to the fact that there's tremendous value to unlock that enables the typically larger customers to overcome the trust barrier when it comes to the need to work with startups that are coming up with new ideas and new technologies. We can continue to talk about some of those topics later, but I think as a starting comment, this is long enough.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that brings also I feel for me an intellectual aspect to the whole thing beyond the pure economics. And so I kind of want to open it up a little bit, since everyone could speak, and I throw into the round the question why and why now? What are the factors that you see why and why now? And I think alluding on that is the technical, historical, even we're talking about industrial revolution aspects, and I throw it in the round, and let's open a discussion here.
Sure. So let me open up this. We had David talk about net value. And the only thing which I was thinking about is he talked about net operating margin, growth, revenue, and all of that. And that's very important. That's a correct definition of value, but that's lagging indicators. When I have to do it now, it's in a journey. IoT is a journey. So how do I go? What do I do today? What do I measure today that makes me sure that I'll attain that growth and revenue kind of a thing? So, I mean, one of the things to think about is that companies, when they start, they don't get value immediately. You know, they have to try a few pilot projects, and then they fail, and then they stumble, and then they do a little bit more. Then they have to modify a little bit of their processes. Ultimately, for me, IoT is about thinking in the entire value chain, right from edge all the way to solutions outcome. And unless we look at the entire value chain as to how these two sensors that I have added and all the data that I have collected, and how do I make better decisions faster such that I can attain some things, and that analytics, how will that analytics add value to business outcome? Because business outcomes may not be able to be achieved just one outcome. It has to be multiple types of analytics have to be done to put it all together. So that's my thought perspectives on that. So I'll be very happy to hear some comments from the team here.
Yeah, I think that brings me to a question to Juri again, because not only has he researched the subject, but he works for a huge industrial organization that does beginning to end in some aspects. So he should have a good overview of that.
So basically, so the idea of Industrial 4.0 in general terms stems from the faster data processing and data transfer itself. So the fourth industrial revolution, so-called, is called also as a big data era, and it is due to some basic enabling technologies, I would say. So it's IoT, it's cloud and edge computing, it's big data analytics itself, yeah, and AI. So through these technologies, we can effective and efficient process the information, and it opens up the opportunity to optimize and also to revolutionize some processes in our value chains. So it's my perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And also, Volkmar, you kind of, just to add to what Juri said, with Industry 4.0, and this kind of dovetails into your why now, I think with what you're seeing with 5G, with their low latency, high bandwidth network slicing capabilities, you're now going to be able to have like massive industrial IoT capabilities, right? Where you can start transmitting and supporting massive amounts of data. So that was never possible before in the traditional sense over Wi-Fi or over some of the lower bandwidth technologies that we had. It was just not possible. So that's a big factor.
It's another one loop through faster data acquisition.
Yeah. And to Juri's point about the edge, I think we always think about the edge as sensors and devices and thermostats, etc. The edge devices are becoming much more powerful, much more computationally intensive. Like I'm talking about robots. I'm talking about drones that are collecting tons and tons of data and video information on transmission lines or on buildings and assessing damage. We're talking about devices, IoT, what we call edge devices in the whole vehicle space, right? Autonomous vehicles and even enabling smart cities where you have these intelligent street poles and intelligent lights, which can actually detect a rogue vehicle or a gunshot and actually totally take a picture automatically or identify security or even change the lighting on the street lights based on an accident or a rogue incident that's out there. So I think with 5G and better data rates and more smart cities and smart spaces coming into play, I think the potential of IoT is just incredibly scaling right now.
If I can just add a few things to that, it's interesting listening to this, because if you think about what Vishal and Juri just talked about, is you can't avoid it. All right. So the why now? Well, guess what? All your competitors are going to be doing it. And guess what? Your customers are used to these things and they've got at their fingertips. If you look at smart cities, they've got an application that says, I need to get this pothole fixed. All right. And so that's an edge device. Essentially, that's giving a signal back to the city that says you need to do something. All right. And here's the other thing to this is that the technology is moving way faster than what people can adopt. All right. Some manufacturers are just starting to look at 5G and what the benefits can be, but they haven't even embarked on their first early journeys with IoT. So we better start doing something today, because that gap is only going to get wider. And it's exacerbated by the fact that we don't have enough people. We don't have data scientists. All right. Quite frankly, one of the most important ingredients that goes into some of these applications is the knowledge of the knowledge workers or the frontline workers that know these processes. And as those workers retire, we've got to fill that void with technologies or knowledge in different ways that sometimes could be enabled through technologies in order to replace that.
If I could just jump in there for a second, but tag on to what Marcus said. I mean, the skills gap over the next 10 years, particularly in AI, is just quantifiable and extraordinary. So we're going to be, as we retool supply chains and manufacturing operations with IoT and IoT integrated with AI, smart backends, we're not going to be talking about supply chain. It's basically just a lot of it's going to become data management, data governance, data distribution, cleansing, all that. And the people who are coming out of school are not trained with the proper toolbox and curriculum, generally speaking, to do that in the United States. So there's a presentation I did recently for the Institute of Supply Management. I'd be happy to share with anybody who wants it, on AI and procurement. And one of the projections we made is that we looked at 10 years forward in AI and what percentage of the activities would be intelligent, would be influenced by either AI or RPA, robotic process automation, within 10 years. And it's extraordinary, because it's just going to actually, once you start, there's sort of a snowball effect. There's no reason to stop it. But I also wanted to pick up another comment that Mark and Jim and others have made, which is that why now? Let's just frame that a little bit. Now kind of is a wave of opportunity, I would say, that spans decades. And right now we're facing this big data kind of and AI kind of opportunity, which is just opening up all these opportunities to automate in smart ways. If you take the energy industry, small solar farms, through the tilting of the angling of the solar panels, and wind power by smart blade adjustments and AI that measures it and then transfers energy to where it's needed. And it sort of explodes the opportunities. And some of the I'll say producers face at this point is that there are too many opportunities, like the number of opportunities. It's not a question of whether there's opportunity or not. There's tons of opportunity. And that's where the consulting comes in that we do. A lot of the question is, well, which has the highest rate of return, payback, and et cetera, for what we're going to go ahead and do, and which opportunities have the least risk as far as data privacy, data security, cyber attacks, and things like that. So it's a very rich time to be working in all of this. And it's the value proposition is very, very compelling, and so are the risks, particularly cyber risks. And I detail a lot of that in my book, Reinventing the Energy Value Chain. In fact, AI is the first opportunity, the largest opportunity. AI, I'll call IoT and Industry 4.0 as related to the AI. And then cybersecurity is the related kind of issue that needs to be dealt with through that. And the transformation is just unbelievable. In fact, they asked me to update a book I wrote in 2011 on oil and gas supply chain management. And I said, sure, I'll do that. And then it ended up being a completely new book because of where we're at with AI, IoT, smart cities, smart energy, everything. So the returns are there and they're large. And so the question becomes, how does a company like BP, for example, which is transforming itself, actually decide sort of which opportunity to surf amongst all the opportunities that it can have? Which technology should it deploy? Which should drive its business strategy, or vice versa? These are big, exciting new questions, and they're all kind of converging now, which is just it almost presents another problem. It's like, we know we need to do this. Where do we start? And that's where we often come in terms of the consulting. They ask those questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I want to say, I want to ask Aaron, actually, there were some keywords here, AI and cybersecurity, and Israel is definitely, from what I see, a powerhouse on AI and cybersecurity solutions. When I was looking in it, do you see tendencies there out of the startup ecosystem of companies that or solutions that could be helpful in terms of the challenges that David just alluded to?
Absolutely. I enjoyed listening to both Mark and David mentioning the scalability challenges in implementing AI solutions, alluding to the lack of data scientists and even the entire educational system. A lot of people are saying that we need to train more data scientists, and we have a big shortage of people that are able to build and model AI solutions. What we see now is a new generation of AI-based startups that are implementing autonomous AI that requires a lot less human intervention in helping the machine learn and in helping the machine optimize the results or the output. So it might just be that we will need a lot of people to help handle data, but a lot less than what people think, but because a lot of those data handling tasks will be handled by robots and machines. And when I say robots, I mean in a very generalistic way, including software-based robots. Regarding cyber, it's a never-ending story. There's too many cyber-related startups in Israel, if you ask me, too much money in that market. A lot of them get funded with crazy, crazy valuations. But in general, of course, what they are doing is important and will continue to be important as we transfer a lot of what we do in the industrial complex, in the consumer world to the digital realm. We need to develop better and better ways to safeguard data and safeguard continuous operation of machines. And there's a lot happening in Israel, of course. Not enough time here to even describe the areas in which they operate. Nevertheless, to give examples. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, in my mind, the canonical story of you know, the IoT impact on the world and the outcome economy is the Amazon story of moving to a new model with the printing machines. And when they decided to print books and said that they're no longer buying printers, but they are going to pay the printer manufacturers by the page. This small change, a very small decision by, of course, a huge player in this case, and you see this also in aircraft engine space and in other spaces. You don't care about the maintenance of the machine. You don't care about calling support. You don't care about, you know, transferring me to a second line of support or third line of support and all that bullshit. You pay per page. If your machine doesn't work, somebody else's machine is going to work. And I don't even care that it's called IoT or not IoT. It's a very, very simple business decision to make that completely changes the relationship between manufacturer and consumer and gets us to a complete new era even in financing industrial operations moving forward. That is the main thing in my mind, the main transformation that is happening. Everything will basically come to serve this new revolution in the way we do business. Even cars, and somebody mentioned Uber and Uber Freight. You know, if I specialize in operating cars, then someone will buy that capability by the hour or by the mile or by the package or by the something. But if I don't, then I'm not going to buy even a single tire.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And a couple of keywords that I found very interesting, self-programming AI, machine as a service, I would call that, instead of, so going from basically CapEx to OpEx, which also very strongly has an influence on the accounting aspect and the cash flow and return on investment. Jim, maybe you could tell us a little bit more what you see there on the horizon in terms of the AI and machine as a service in your world.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Aaron. I think the trend is going to be towards, and we refer to it as servitization, is where the OEM model of selling product will change dramatically to a servitization model, or they'll be forced to anyway, even if they resist. It'll go from as you said, Volkmar, it'll be from CapEx to OpEx, where people will be buying a result, through a machine as a result, instead of buying a product. And IoT is accelerating that, because you're getting insight into operating conditions in real time that no one ever had before. And the prices of sensors, the prices of AI, machine learning, and everything else are making that all very accessible, even to small manufacturers. So the model itself is deployable. It's here. It's not the future, and it's highly scalable. Everything I read, everything I see, everything I hear, however, indicates that most OEMs are resisting it. And I think part of the reason is their commercial model and how they make profit. The vast majority of OEMs make their money in the aftermarket parts, the sale of replacement parts. They're more often than not, the original equipment is sold at break even or loss. And so the model has to change, almost dramatically. And there'll probably be a lot of people that go out of business as a result. There'll be new entrants that will take over. But it's going to look, and I totally agree with Aaron, it's going to look dramatically different, and probably, maybe not even 5 or 10 years from now.
Well, thank you so much. We're kind of towards the end of the discussion. we have 1 hour done, and I think it was fantastic. So I don't know if someone in the audience back there in Texas in the hotel, or the online audience has some questions. With the online audience, I kindly ask you to text rather than use your microphone.
Have any questions in the room? Hang on. All right, we unmuted? Yeah. Volkmar, can you hear us?
Yeah,
yes,
perfectly.
Let the microphone reach here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Wahid Dukna. I work for a systems integrator located here at Sology Solutions in the IoT space. I think what has been probably more implied than expressively talked about is not the value creation as much as the value capture. And I think each speaker kind of addressed the capture side of the value in different ways. For example, the Tech Mahindra gentleman talked about the need for systems integrator and operating the systems that are available. The use cases are many. Technology is an enabler, and it's creating a lot of value conceptually. And the question is, how can we capture that? Whether there's a real need for it, whether it can be actually implemented. And that becomes the question. I would say, you know, this discussion would probably be more, I think, impactful as far as I'm concerned in how we reach. And we talked about time to creating value and time to market, all of that, but it wasn't very expressive, I would say. So that's kind of my take, but thank you very much. It was very insightful.
So what's the question?
Did you have a question specifically, or just a comment?
Well, you know, this is more of a statement, and if there's any feedback to that statement,
Okay.
if you concur or not, that's my take on it. Yeah.
Let me see if I understood the question right. When we talk about the value, to me, instead of looking at the value at the macro level, should we look at value at the local level where operations are being done? As an example, if we are doing some kind of a manufacturing process or something like that, maybe we can say, where is the time being spent? Or we are doing some kind of staffing analysis. How are these activities staffed? And how do we allocate resources? And where this edge to outcome, where new data that we will get, what kind of insights that will provide to me, so that in the end-to-end process, I can speed up my timing, I can reduce the staff, or I can better allocate resources or things like that. And it's the molecules of that will then integrate and give the overall value. So it has to be somehow integrated into the business processes. And otherwise we will have a one-off success, but then scalability could be a little bit challenged. If I understood your question correctly.
Well, just to be clear, the premise of my question is because we talked about technology becoming enabling more so today than ever before. We have 5G, we have the edge computing, with very powerful edge devices as opposed to dumb devices. All of that has been mentioned. So the possibility of creating value is now almost a given, but not every value is captured or needs to be captured. So that's kind of what I was more addressing, is that yes, it is indeed, you know, 5G, it is indeed edge computing, but is it really a value that is meaningful, that needs to be captured? Or if it is to be captured, what's standing in the way of it's not being captured? I think that's become more, since, you know, it was mentioned at the beginning that we're moving more towards the business aspects of the IoT. And that is really where I think is important, whether to the investment community. We see a lot of crazy valuation, as was mentioned, only because we're enabled by technology to create a value. But is that value really worth pursuing? And if so, is it really being captured?
If I could just make a quick comment about that, I really think it's a great point. And one of the challenges is that there's so many benefits, how to split them in the new model between the OEMs, the integrators, and the customers, and the aggregators, whoever else is involved. So in the case of, like we talked about as a service, I mean, this has been going on in aircraft engines back in 1990, and then it's emerged in all sorts of other facets of business. We dealt with it in oil and gas, drilling as a service, that kind of stuff. So what it does is it raises questions about who's actually going to pay and who's going to get the value, both short and long term, from all these things. Sulzer faces it with pumps. If they try to implement the pump, you've got an installer, you've got a data cloud-based solution provider, you've got an AI backend, you've got all these other companies. And how much is the customer going to reap from the benefit of that data knowledge, the big data, the equipment and preventive maintenance information and insights that come out of it? How much is going to accrue to the, the software company? And I think we're seeing kind of the shuffling take place right now, and that is a little bit of slowing it down, I would say. Once this resolves and we have some consistency, we might see it accelerate some more. But that's one comment on all that.
Hi. Mike's got a question. So I think what you're saying is simplified further. Just if I take a picture of a potato chip, where's the value of that? Are we going to have more potato chips per hour? Are we going to sell them for higher price because there's less broken potato chips in a thing? I don't know about you. My printer's all been perfect, but so what makes where is the value? Just because we can take a picture a million times a second. What's the value of that? And how do we forget about how we realize it, with SaaS model or whatever?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So what this particular manufacturer did was, instead of having 10 people on the assembly line doing manual inspections, like manual random inspections, they were able to actually do that on the edge and reduce their staffing, reduce their error rates, and increase their assembly line value, right? So I think that was a huge ROI for them in terms of both like cost reduction and also with COVID coming in, they were not able to get the kind of staffing profile that they wanted, and they didn't want that many people in the factory itself. So that's an example of where sort of this edge computing and intelligence on the edge and decision making on the edge was used.
That makes sense. You also lose product like you do at I Love Lucy eating the chocolates. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've been working on IoT for a while. I worked for an OEM in the specialty chemical space here in Texas. And what I've noticed is that we are not a telco company. Most companies don't want to be a telco company. And with a sunset of 3G coming in oil and gas, I'm just starting to use 4G, right? So, or at least 4.5G. My question is anyone working on a shared network or a strategy just like the power companies do? So there's a utilities telecom council. It's a well-known organization. So what I'm wondering is who is working on these far-flung places that are not going to see 5G, that are about to see 4.5G, 5L, and then specifically, what about CBRS and LoRa? Is anyone working in that, or is there a consortium, or is there interest in using a public LoRa network?
Yeah, absolutely, Pawan. I think you've asked a very good question. I don't think 5G is a must-have for IoT. In fact, if you look at LoRa that you mentioned, right, long-range, low-power solutions, we are seeing, Tech Mahindra ourselves, we are doing some amazing implementations for LoRa, both in the inventory management space, because you want sensors that send out data or messages maybe once every hour or once every 4 or 5 hours. So it's not very data critical, and that's why you can actually have a very low power profile where your sensor will last for somewhere between 5 to 10 years, right, in remote places. Same thing with farming, where you are giving them information on the irrigation levels or the temperature levels. There's a whole LoRa alliance that works on that. Same thing with the likes of AT&T and Verizon. They are now doing 4G private networks for smart campuses and smart ports and smart factories. So there's that whole alliance there. And at the same time, Verizon is doing something called MEC, which is like mobile edge computing with 5G. So it's like a mix there. This is where some of these integrators are coming in with CBRS as well. So if you want to do a private stadium, or if you want to do a private campus, a private industry, where this CBRS is a huge asset that we have in the US as well in terms of spectrum. So this is definitely, it's not a 5G play only. I believe 5G is still out there in the future, but there's so much happening with some of these low bandwidth, low power solutions as well. And to your point, is there a one sort of one-stop shop that's doing that? No, I mean, this is where some system integrators like us come in and give you like some consulting on what's the best for you, and we can pull in the right network for you. So I think the best option is to work with some sort of a system integrator who can pull in both the telco side as well as help you on the IT and OT implementation as well. And I'd love to talk to you offline on that too, Pawan.
Thanks. I think we're coming to the end now. We had basically one question from the audience and one question I asked from the online audience to please pose your question in the text box. So we have answered those, and I think we answered a question from the attendance here in Texas. And I would like to conclude this panel now. Also, some of our panelists, it's very late already in Europe, and some already had to leave. So the event was scheduled for 1 hour. I want to thank you very, very much for your precious time, your intellectual knowledge bringing to that subject. I feel deeply humbled and extremely thankful. Also on behalf of the Texas group, and I give it back to Gary for the final words. Thank you.
Where's our beer, Gary?
What was that?
Where's our beer? Where's the beer for the panelists?
I'm going hardcore.
You gotta come down the street.
You gotta come to Texas for the good stuff. Well, I do want to thank everybody for participating today and showing up here at the hotel, and for those online. Volkmar, again, thank you very much for putting this excellent panel together. Along with that, I would also thank the panel, some great experts, and especially I know a couple of guys are probably looking at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock in the morning. So I kind of got my world clock out just to kind of get an idea of where we are in Germany and Israel and so forth. So anyway, I thank you guys for participating online and for our panelists. Hopefully we'll get some good feedback as far as what some additional topics will be. Love to get that feedback from anyone. I think my contact information is available through the IoT Texas Meetup site. And if you want to keep track of what we're currently doing, both for our happy hour, which is our evening events, and then we rotate it about every 2 weeks. We have our breakfast event, which Ed has been running now for almost 2 years.
7 years.
7. Why did I say 2? 7.
I've been recording for 2.
We're recording for 2, exactly. So, and then we also want to kind of preview, we're thinking about for September, which will be the 7-year anniversary, potentially just have a happy hour period here at the hotel. So we're kind of playing with that and get some feedback there. Again, thank you for everybody participating in the event tonight. Appreciate it. All right.
All right, so now we're going to do a 30-second introduction around the room so everybody knows